It's time for today's Tech Coach with Keith George, the Big Tech Coach. This is the podcast for instructional technology coaches and the teachers they support. Here's our host, Keith George.
And hello, this is today's Tech Coach with Keith George and Mark Coleman. We are coming to you with episode 2.0. Glad to have you back. I hope you enjoyed the first episode. And we have been working on improving our audio quality and trying to get a better idea of our time frames and topics. We want to remind you, of course, that you can see the show notes at bigtechcoach.com. And we really want to see some comments from you, get a little feedback from you. We've gotten a couple of messages, and we appreciate those. But we're really looking forward to hearing some feedback for you. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well, thank you. How are you tonight, Keith?
Good. It's been a busy day as we wrap up the school years.
Yes. Well, you know, as a tech coach that's not based in a school system, here in the last week of school, no one wants to see me. They've all got grades due. They all have the final week of school, and we're sitting here wanting the I's dotted and T's crossed on technology plans and budgets and inventories, and I'm sort of a persona non grata when I come to the school. No one wants to see me. I probably mangled my Latin just then. But.
And when you first mentioned that as far as not having as much to do, I was thinking of the school level coaches who often get stuck with inventory, and they would not think that they have nothing to do right now. So it's
not
an
only do
interesting
they
time of
get
the year.
stuck with inventory, they get stuck with jobs many times that fall outside the job description, as in, can you watch Miss So-and-so's class while she's doing this end of the year graduation thing?
Absolutely. Duties as assigned. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a big one. Well, let's talk about what's been happening in the news. Our big story, as far as EdTech is concerned, is Google I/O, the annual Google Developers Conference. And even though that's primarily for developers, that is traditionally an announcement platform for Google to announce a lot of their new products and services.
It felt like a rock concert this year in the big outdoor venue, and I, for once, I wasn't in the classroom and was able to watch the whole thing this year.
Yeah, absolutely. They did hold it outdoors. That was a little bit of a change for them and made for some interesting aspects to it.
Did you see the guys playing the big strings strung across the entire?
Yes.
There's a physics lesson in there, right there for that.
Yes, if you haven't seen the video for that, I'm sure you can find it online. But that was, I started to say a life-size harp, but that wasn't even a life-size harp. That was a mega arena-size harp.
It looks like they had textured gloves, and so the strings were strung across the arena, and they were stroking each string as a different note, and were able to generate some melodies over the background. It was a very big opening.
Right, very, very different. As far as EdTech, there were a couple of little tidbits. They really didn't, in the opening keynote, they really didn't talk about education specifically. Were you surprised by that?
With as much as they've been talking about Chromebooks being the de facto machine of schools right now, surpassing the iPads, I was surprised we didn't hear more about it, but second day, it was a Chromebook fest, and so I guess they're going to keep education in its own little corner, as it were.
Right.
And of course, the big news coming from the second day is if you have a touch screen, and that's the big thing, a touch screen Chromebook, you will be able to but install apps from the Google Play Store meant for Android. And so that exponentially increases the power of a Chromebook.
Right, and that has always been one of my, not really hesitations, but one of my arguments. I guess the way to word it is one of my arguments for iPad over Chromebook. Not that I think there's a singular choice, but the iPads do have the ability to have apps installed that can operate anytime, anywhere, whether you have an internet connection or not. And of course, the Chromebook depends heavily on that connection, but this may change that.
It well could. You've got the standalone apps. You can take the Chromebook out in the field and use those apps and then bring it back to your connection and upload your data. And so that's a big plus. And not only that, you've got just the giant scope of the Google Play Store available to you. So that's a big deal. And one of the things in the keynote was the Anytime apps. The way, and in case you didn't see it, the very last thing they brought up in the keynote was a way that, say, I get a link, you can deep link within an app. And so if the example they used was for B&H Photo, their just wonderful, slick app, if you got a link to it, it would download the piece of the app for the store and then show you whatever piece you were looking at. And if you wanted to check out, it'd download the piece for checkout. When you were done, those would disappear. And so the idea that you could potentially deep link to a Android app on a Chromebook, it download the pieces you need and then it disappear and you never had to do a full app install. That gets intriguing for educational purposes and really opens it up to where you can send a link to somebody and no app install is required. It's all happening in the background in real time and requiring a mega tight data connection, but that we're going to assume everyone has those, right?
Well, I'm not sure if that's a great assumption. For our listeners that may not be familiar, B&H is an audio-video store, kind of one of those, the equivalent of an online big box store. And the example that Mark gave is, say, for instance, I've been asked to spec out a video camera for a school. And if I find the link and I send it to Mark through the messaging app, he will get the link and it will recognize that it's part of B&H's product line, I guess, and will
it's reading a lot from the URL, I think.
Right. So it will recognize where it's from and will install just enough of B&H's app so that even if Mark doesn't have the app, he could immediately go through the purchasing process in a very, very smooth format, just like he had the app, because it downloads just enough of it to accomplish the task. And while the examples that seem to be coming up in kind of the mainstream, the non-education media, are things like shopping or hotel reservations or dinner reservations, I immediately started thinking about things like VoiceThread. If you're familiar with VoiceThread, it's a nice little app where you can have video comments and responses and things like that. Well, what if I send you just a link to that and it automatically pulls in enough for you to record your response to it? Or something like, EduCreations, where it pulls down enough just so that you can view the EduCreations presentation. Or
Prezi. It downloads just enough of the
Absolutely.
Prezi app to where you don't have to do anything, and it's slicker and better. It's slicker and more stable than viewing it in any of the browsers that might have HTML5 versus Java versus Flash, all those sorts of issues. Instead, it's well within the app, and there it goes.
Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see what the app developers are able to do with this. I think we, for the most part, realize that EdTech is usually a step or two behind the profit-making entities as far as, I think
somebody's making a profit on EdTech.
Well, I agree with that, but I think you know what I mean. I think
exactly.
the businesses, the buying movie tickets and things like that will happen first, but EdTech usually is in that second wave there. So
speaking about how it's coming in the second wave, let's talk about Spaces for a second, which wasn't part of I.O. We might have mentioned it in passing last week. Google dropped Spaces, which is an even more localized social network sort of thing. I look at it as sort of a Slack replacement, and if you don't know Slack, it's sort of internal messaging for an office or a small work group that allows you to keep multiple threads and share data and images and links and everything very easily and very casually. And this is the same sort of thing tied into the Google network. It's not part of Google Apps for Ed. It's not one of those services you can enable for your Google Apps for Ed yet. Word on the street is this summer, but we'll see. We're using Spaces a little here. Some of my Google groups are using Spaces, my Google Educator groups. I think the potential's there, and especially when you can farm out things to certain groups of students. Here's you guys a space for putting all your data together, and it seems like a more natural way to do that.
Absolutely, and so that is just spaces.google.com. There is also an iOS app. I would imagine that the Android app is rolled out by now.
It's there.
It's there.
But I'll tell you where it's not. In the little waffle tool on Google, I can't get it to create a little Spaces icon in there. So, get on that, Google.
Yeah. So, and as Mark was saying, this is basically a workspace for teams. So when we convert that over to education, you could certainly have, a Spaces for your English department, a Spaces for your math department, for your third grade, things like that. I see it probably starting with things more like the technology planning team or the CIP team.
Or the prompt committee.
The prompt committee, absolutely.
We got to realize how people are going to use these things.
So it provides a space that you can invite people to. So it's somewhat private. It allows you to share links, post comments back and forth, have discussions going back and forth. And in all honesty, I imagine that there will be even more additional features that will come out as they continue. But it's a nice little app. I've been pleased with it. I think, I honestly, within minutes of hearing of the app, I was already trying to download it. And
me as well.
The first space, I guess is what they're calling the first space I created was for today's Tech Coach, and you probably had an invitation right about the time you got it installed because I knew that we would be looking at this. So that's another little interesting bit of information that came out. I came across an article that fits kind of into the news, and it is by Daniel Willingham. It's a New York Daily News article from, I guess, about 10 days ago now. And as for most of us, I think the title itself will attract everybody's interest, and that is The False Promise of Tech in Schools, a Chagrined Admission 2.0. So, overall, basically was looking at the have we really benefited from ed tech? And of course, it starts with the 10-year-old problem of equipment, buy, where we were just loading down schools with stuff, and we weren't really paying much attention to professional development. And that actually is a incredibly good transition into what we're going to talk about today with professional development. But I sent you that article. Did you have a chance to take a look at it?
I looked through it, and I see several things that strike chords. One thing that we have Marissa Mayer, who was with Google at the time, and now she's a bigwig at Yahoo, I believe. Her statement that the Internet's relegated memorization of rote facts to a mental exercise or enjoyment because everybody loves memorizing facts. I say this as well. I mean, what's the point of learning exactly what year the Ming Dynasty ended when I can tell you that in 45 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, with my phone? We have this, we've offloaded rote memorization to a degree, but that's not the only purpose of ed tech, and really we can't rely too heavy on that. If I have to look up everything in my field, it's going to make it slow going and non-intuitive, and I'm going to be unable to quickly do some of those higher order depth of knowledge, deeper levels of knowledge, sorts of thinking that we should be worried about. I mean, let's face it, that's a maxim in education. Rote memorization. What else you got? And I don't think that's a maxim of education. I think I came up with that on the spot, and that should be obvious. And so it's the other thing I saw in there was talking about handwriting, and I'm fully into the new school. We do communicate through keystrokes. My children both have horrible handwriting. But I saw a bill that was about teaching cursive and how it needs to be still required, and I saw some debate about that. And really the only thing I use cursive for is my signature. It seems like we could focus that on other things, but then we have to admit there's going to be times our students don't have computers that they need to communicate in written language. So there were several points in here that I know people in the circles we frequent have been discussing for years. The money pit, the rote memorization, the handwriting, all of these things.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one of the statements they made is something that we've been saying as tech coaches for a long time, and that is, I'm quoting, electronic textbooks and computer-driven whiteboards are just new delivery systems, and researchers can evaluate those quickly. But careful, planned assessment and the courage to admit something isn't working is still a rarity. And I think we at our level of ed tech have been reminding everyone that if you are just, let's go back to the SAMR model. If you're just substituting a electronic whiteboard or PowerPoint for the handwritten notes on the chalkboard, you're not really integrating technology. And I think we've gotten to a point where people are recognizing that more and more. But it is a good point that it's as Willingham put it, the careful, planned assessment and the courage to admit when something isn't working. Well, in order to admit that something isn't working, we have to have that reflection time for coaches and teachers. You have to be able to take that opportunity to really look at what you're presenting in the class, what you're working with on the teachers, and see what works and what doesn't. And like they said, have the courage to admit when it's not working. It's that freedom to fail.
And we need the time for coaches to be able to sit with someone and figure out where the disconnect was. And I'll admit, when I went paperless, I started with straight up S out of the SAMR model. I was putting my worksheets online, basically. Not really worksheets, but you understand, something that would be a general written assignment, and you're going to fill it out online, or you're going to upload a Word document or something like that. Some things didn't work, and I didn't know they didn't work until they were about over. And we need to be able, and I scrapped it and I reformulated it for next year.
Well, and remember from last episode with Jacqueline Stevens, we're not by any means saying that the substitution level is something to avoid. Remember her analogy of the swimming pool and your swimming laps, you're going back and forth. But again, keep in mind that what I was saying is, if that's all you're doing and you're thinking that you're integrating technology, that's when you're really suffering. And
if your packet of worksheets, the dreaded worksheet packet we all make fun of, if now it's one little section on your Moodle site and that's all you've got, we have just wasted all the money and all the connecting devices and the servers and the PD and everything.
Absolutely. I think it took me a while to really get a feel for if this was a criticism article or a challenge. And I think I'm leaning towards that it was more of a challenge. It ends up with the statement, above all, let's remember, technology may change quickly, our brains don't. And I think that statement is just simply we have to do better at this. which I think leads perfectly into what we had talked about our topic for this week, and that's professional development. And I guess I was thinking more professional development for coaches. I think that's one of the most often overlooked areas, as far as we tend to be the ones responsible for PD, but when do we get PD for ourselves as coaches, especially PD that is designed to help us improve our practice as coaches? As I've spoken with technology coaches, it seems to be that it's much more informal. Is that what you've seen?
Yes. I have gotten more from Google Groups and Twitter than I've gotten from PDs I've gone to sit down for. Not only are they not, I don't have PD generated for me, it seems. And when I go try and find PD for me, and you probably experienced this yourself, you go to a conference, and even the techie conferences, and you go, oh, there's a session, and you get down there, and you've been in there an hour, and you've heard a couple of things that you probably would have figured out on your own if you had done a deep dive into this. Not saying that we're like tech geniuses or anything, but the tech coach sort of mentality, we're the sort of people who can figure out software and figure out how it would be used in classrooms. It's hard to find good in-depth PD for a tech coach that will help us not only educate the educators, but see how they're implementing and how things are changing.
Well, and I think there's two distinct types of PD that I think are required for coaches. And the aspect of it that bothers me is when you're talking instructional coaches, without the T this time, without the technology, instructional coaches spend a lot of time really going deep into the coaching model. There's a lot of Jim Knight's work and Unmistakable Impact, and I'm glancing back at my bookshelf, and I have a half a dozen books on peer coaching and things like that. But to this day, all of my PD related to coaching has been me seeking it out, me reading the books, me looking for opportunities to, delve into it, looking at online opportunities, trying to bounce ideas off, like you said, in Twitter and in my own personal learning network. Because for some reason, if we are instructional technology coaches, the PD that we do have the opportunity to participate in is all about technology. And I think the coaching part gets left out a lot.
And it's almost like we have to pay attention to the non-technology coaching and then figure out ourselves how that would be implemented with the technology bent. That final piece of the puzzle is up to us.
Right. And that's something that I personally would like to see changed. I know that even at events like ed camps that are they're not supposed to be technology focused, even though they kind of grew up out of that technology area and they still probably lean that way. I'm trying to make sure at ed camps that I attend, and I am on the planning committee of both Ed Camp Montgomery along with you, Mark, but also Ed Camp Lake Eufaula in Eufaula, Alabama, that's coming up. Our Georgia folks that are listening, we're right there on the border. Feel free to come join us. And I'm wanting to try to see more and more of that instructional practice that's not necessarily technology related, especially in the area of coaching.
It seems to me that we've got to make the opportunities in these informal situations like ed camps until something comes along. Now, I know you have been working in the past, and myself also, with a state committee on tech coaching, and we bounce some of these ideas across. But I look at some of the states that seem even more forward-thinking than Alabama, not saying we're not a forward-thinking state, but ones that seem to run with all sorts of technological balls, and still they are not there seems to be that deficit. That gap seems to exist across the board. And I'm not sure how to fill it without throwing money at it to start with. And that brings all the issues that come from there.
Well, I think the absolute best thing that has come up that will help us, and it is, I will say, slowly being adopted across the country, and that is the ISTE coaching standards. ISTE released their coaching standards. It's been several years ago now, but more and more school systems, if they are hiring technology coaches, are utilizing those standards as, basically a framework to develop the job description. Several states are deeply integrating them into their evaluation system, or if they are lucky enough to have a state-funded technology coaching program. North Carolina is our big example there.
Right.
That they're incorporating that into the recommended job descriptions for those state-funded positions. And so that's something that's important, because if you look at the coaching standards provided by ISTE, in some ways, there's not a lot of technology in it. It is more about the coaching and integrating the tools that we have, as opposed to, you need to know how to create a Word document, you need to know how to create a PowerPoint, you need to know how to create a spreadsheet.
Well, that sort of thing changes so quick. You have to address it as more generally coaching. And maybe this is where the disconnect comes from, is we have to address it in the coaching factor, because if we address specific technology models in 3 to 5 years, we have to revamp all those from scratch.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's where the disconnect comes from.
Absolutely. And
state governments and school systems do not move that quick to regenerate new curriculum like that.
Well, and that actually is a nice transition to an article that you found about new ideas teachers should try. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's an article at Teach Thought, teachthought.com. They come through my Twitter feed, and I don't follow them, but I see so much of their stuff through retweets, I don't think it's necessary. But I may follow them now, actually. But it's 12 new ideas teachers should try. And, a lot of these things I really like to see. It's based around a big graphic. And some of these things are new and fancy technologies, and some of them are pedagogical thoughts, like going with it. One of the things that says everything teachers should try is mobile learning, place-based education plus project-based learning. Think about that sort of thing. And as you and I both have taken some classes in mobile learning, and it's not about just being able to turn in your LMS assignment from an iPad. It's more about using all these functionalities of mobile devices like pads and phones and things like that have GPS and cameras and all sorts of expandable sensor units and things like that. How do we implement these to be part of our education? And there's several interesting things in there here, but I'd like your input on some of these. For example, 3D printing's on one. Every teacher should try 3D printing. Well, why is my question. I think I see 3D printers going in at schools. I see them at every convention I go to, that they're 3D printers, but not a lot about, okay, what do I do with this now? Or more importantly, what do my kids do with it now?
Right, and my first thought, and I'll get back to the 3D printing particularly, but my first thought when I saw this is, first off, they hit all the buzzwords. 3D printing, gamification, virtual reality, maker and tinkering, and those are kind of the technology-driven hot button topics right now. And like you said, 3D printing. Do I think every school should have a 3D printer and the kids should be exposed to it? Absolutely. And when incorporated into a good makerspace or STEM lab program where the students are actually solving problems and using the 3D printer as one of the many tools available to them to solve a specific challenge or problem, I love it. But one of the things that if you look at the article for 3D printing, it said to consider MakerBot and ThingLink. Well, ThingLink to me is more of a infographic, an interactive graphic product. So is that falling into 3D printing? That's interesting. But I think just as interesting, and you talked about this as well, several of the ideas, is what it termed them, that were included were things like self-directed learning, student questions to guide everything. That's the, PBL, inquiry-based.
A lot of that could be just folded under PBL, several of these things.
Right, and that's the whole thing, is several of these things could be integrated into a well-run classroom without a lot of extra effort. Takes a lot of planning on the teacher's part. We'll never get to a point, in my mind, where teachers have enough planning time to do things right. That's one of the bigger things that has to change to make these things possible. But I at least was pleased that it wasn't just 12 new apps or tools or anything like that. Especially I don't know if these were ordered in any way, but if you look at it, left to right, up, down, the last one that was mentioned is new learning taxonomies. And of course, there was a little bit of a plug for Teach Thought's learning taxonomy, but also Understanding by Design, the 6 facets. I'm sure that if we looked into that more, you would see a little bit more on SAMR and TPAC and things like that. So it was interesting. The article it was more of a graphic. It wasn't really an article that went in depth on any of these, but it certainly made you think about how these things could be integrated. So I found it pretty interesting.
And the one I liked was that it started with live stream your teaching. Boy, you got to really be a brave teacher I'm going to live stream class today and everything's going to be great. And if a parent's watching, the student's not going to say anything untoward, or we all know the ways that could blow up in your face.
Well, and for years they talked about when they started putting cameras in schools in the hallways and things like that, more of as a security thing. I would often hear teachers worry about or even complain, they're going to put them in the classroom next. And I was always like, okay. I'm not really doing anything in there that I'm worried about anybody seeing. And in some instances, from a classroom management or security aspect, it may even be better for me. It's not necessarily my word against theirs anymore. But thinking it from the teaching point of view is interesting. I know that there have been some research projects where they did just that, but that was more designed to highlight good teaching and or develop evaluation systems. I will say that one of the best things you can do as a classroom teacher or even as a coach is to stick a camera up in the room and just let it record, and then you look back on it and reflect upon it. Maybe with a trusted friend, what do they call them, a critical friend.
Exactly.
To give you some feedback. But, the camera doesn't lie. So, no, I never, ever, ever would predominantly have girls answer the questions I ask in my social studies class over than boys. But if I were to videotape my lesson, I might find that that's not true. It might be that you call on the ones that know the answers more, or that you do stay in one place in the front of the room more often. And I think that's one of the overarching benefits of national boards, national board certified teachers, is that process of videotaping the classroom. It has gotten that aspect of looking at it and reflecting on that.
I know I've had the opportunity to observe many classrooms, and I've done it surreptitiously through the door or in one of the fishbowl sorts of schools that have giant windows and everything. I've done it just sort of from the hall, and I've done it sitting in the room, and I've done it with a camera in the room. And it's amazing how much more teachers move around the classroom when you're sitting in the back with or without a camera rather than just sort of standing down the hall and looking through a window. So maybe, and I don't think it's a conscious thing on their part, maybe just the fact they think about such things when they're put on the spot and they realize that, oh, I've just been standing here for a couple of minutes, I need to move around. So maybe teachers need that sort of impetus in the classroom.
Well, and, a part of every coaching model is the observation. So as coaches, we need to do that observation. We then need to provide feedback to the teacher and, help them identify things that they want to improve on. We all know that. But even trying to convince teachers that have self-identified some aspect of their teaching that they want to improve, and just have them, again, set up the video camera, just have it record. Nobody else knows you're doing it. You're the only one that's going to see it as the teacher, and just look at it for yourself, and just try to spot those things, and see what you can improve on.
You can pick up things. You can pick up your buzzwords that the kids have been picking up on all along. Things that you say that are the things that are going to be the basis of the imitation of you. You can find out when you're relying on those sorts of things, and when what you fall back on in a safe zone, when you get sort of off the tracks and you're trying to pull it back. You can find out what brings the monotony to the class a lot of times. You can see it. You can listen to yourself and think, oh, wow, I would have been bored setting up this lesson.
I was just getting ready to say, and if you record yourself for 45, 50 minutes and you can't watch the videotape, then there's a problem with that. So that's an interesting conversation, and something that is a part of coaching that we need to make sure that we focus on. It is certainly something that would benefit teachers to do. That leads us into, as we've been talking about professional development, and again, coaching professional development, one of the things that jumped out at me this week was actually a tweet of a blog post by someone in my personal professional network, and that is Nicole Zampano, and she is with the Chicago Public Schools and has been a part of the EdTech Coaches MOOC that I was a part of, is active on Twitter in those coaching circles. And she did a interesting blog post talking about professional portfolios, even if you're not looking for a job. So I touched base with her this week and did a short little interview with her. So Mark, why don't we take a listen to that?
Let's.
Everyone, we're pleased to have Nicole Zampano from Chicago with us. She is what's your exact title, Nicole?
Hi, Keith. Just a plain old technology coach in the Chicago Public School System. Okay, well, we're not plain old technology coaches, but we've talked about on the show before that there are so many different titles that I always like everybody to give them a chance. But Ms. Zampano and I actually connected first again through the EdTech Coaches PLN through ISTE, and have seen each other in many, many online chats, but this is actually our first time to meet as well. Nicole, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of your background? Yep, great to be here. So this is actually my 23rd year in education, believe it or not. It goes very fast. As I said, I'm in the Chicago Public School System. I've been in here my entire career. I spent 15 years as a fourth grade teacher, and I had an opportunity to come out of the classroom and become a technology coach, and really I've never looked back. I think I've found my passion and I found my niche in between being a technology coach. I also am a national board certified teacher and an adjunct professor at a few of the local universities, so I get my teaching fix through that venue. And then lastly, I am the president-elect of the Illinois Computing Educators, which is ISTE's Illinois affiliate.
So I'm heavily embedded in the technology education world, and I absolutely love it.
Well, great. It's a pleasure to have you on today's Tech Coach. This week's episode, not this week's necessarily, but this episode is focused on professional development, and we're going to be talking with Mark Coleman again and a couple of others possibly about kind of the need for professional development for technology coaches. What has been your experience as far as, and you may want to give us a little bit of background as far as do you serve a single school, that kind of thing, but what professional development is offered to you as a coach?
Okay, well, I am in a K-8 regional gifted center within the city, and really there is no formal training. When I received my master's degree in educational technology, I was with a cohort, and the whole purpose of the cohort was there were a group of us in Chicago public schools that were going to be trained as lead technology teachers or tech coaches. And really, that's the only formal type of training I've received. Every other type of PD has been pretty much on my own, seeking out book studies and Twitter chats and professional development opportunities on my own. So we really haven't come across much formal. I try and look when I'm at conferences for sessions that are geared toward coaching, just to kind of see that I'm on the same page. I'm, again, in a K-8 building, but I'm the only coach that there is. So there's a little bit of difficulty sometimes in, thinking, am I doing everything I can be doing for my teachers? Am I on top of my game with everything? And, not necessarily having anybody in the same position to bounce ideas off of is a little bit difficult. So I rely heavily on my PLN, and they never disappoint.
Right. And we've talked before about how coaches are many times an island to themselves, and that can get not only lonely but frustrating because you're never sure if you're doing the absolute best for your teachers, and you sometimes don't have that in-person body to bounce ideas off of, and that's why the PLNs and our Twitter friends and things like that are so important to us. What kind of coaching PD does your state affiliate for ISTE? Does the affiliate try to provide any specialized training for coaches?
Not for coaches in particular. We're basically advocating for technology in all of education. So a lot of what we do is geared toward classroom teachers. Some of it is geared toward coaching, but there's not a specific area that we set aside for that. We have a huge conference every February, and I believe we are now the 5th largest EdTech conference, and we have strands for everyone that is passionate about technology in education. We have strands for pre-service teachers, strands for technology coordinators, strands for leaders, for superintendents, and so on. So, we're basically advocating for everyone getting on board, not just coaches.
Well, one of the interesting things we have down here in Alabama is the State Technology Conference, which seems to be more equivalent to yours, is actually run by the State Department of Education, actually the section in which I used to be a part of. However, we have our Technology Coordinators Association, the Alabama Education Technology Association, that was founded for the technology coordinators, but thankfully have adopted technology coaches as part of their team. And they actually are rolling out right now a certificated professional development program for technology coordinators, and are simultaneously working to introduce one for technology coaches. So soon in Alabama, a technology coach will actually be able to earn a certificate that should be recognized by all of the school districts. It's not through a university per se, but it's through the organization, and is going to very closely follow the ISTE standards for coaches. So that's pretty interesting. So what type of professional development do you seek out for yourself?
Oh, goodness. Really, there's not one specific type. I'm basically looking at anything that, again, can help me stay cutting edge, and anything that I can see fitting in, especially for people in our building that might not necessarily be at the level that, hey, I want to integrate technology on a regular basis. So really, just looking for anything that's going to help me personally grow. Recently, I participated in a MOOC for digital coaching and had a chance to explore that venue. And then, most recently, the EdTech book study has been great as well. A lot of professional reading and things like that on my own. But there isn't one specific thing that I'm looking for. I'm just kind of looking to see what's going on, get a feel for the entire, field and who's doing what.
Was that the MOOC out of North Carolina State that we had?
That was.
Yeah, we had Jacqueline Stevens on last episode, and she told us about that, and we're looking forward to the next round of that. I actually have joked, threatened, whatever, that I was going to join it a second time just because I found the connection so beneficial. The conversation was as beneficial as the activities.
Right. For me, I found the conversation more beneficial. For the activities that we completed in that particular MOOC, I was familiar with everything. So, I took more personally out of the conversations. And again, having a chance to hear, I'm not the only person that's in a building on their own, or I'm not the only person that's wondering, am I doing everything I can do? So, it's always nice to connect with new people you don't know and kind of realize that, we're all separated throughout the world, but basically we're all experiencing, the same type of learning, which is great.
Right. From some of our conversations online before, I think we have a few things in common. I also do some adjuncting at a couple of local universities. And I was looking at one of your recent blog posts about professional portfolios, and a couple of things struck me. And I think, again, similarly, I have both undergrad and graduate students, and there are distinct differences between those two groups.
There are.
And I'll be honest, some of them have surprised me in that on some topics I have expected the undergrads, thinking they were younger, to be a little bit more familiar with some aspects of things, and that hasn't 100% proven to be true. I think the idea that all of our young people are digital natives and therefore they know everything, whether that's in the K-12 classroom or even undergrad now, I think that's a misnomer. But one of the things that I noticed about the graduate students is with some, not across the board, but a reluctance to adapt is still prevalent, even especially if they are not. My particular course is a required course, and so not all of them are by any means EdTech majors. If they're just a curriculum area major, it seems to be a little bit tougher to prove the benefit of it. Have you seen that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely, to a T. With the younger generation and the younger students that are coming up, I think the biggest difference that I'm finding is they're not reluctant. They're still open. So with some of the graduate students that I've had that are already established in a classroom, they're established and they know what they're doing. And sometimes it's difficult to get them to see, you know what you're doing and you're effective, but you can add in this new element of technology and bring even more excitement and more engagement and active learning into your classroom. And as you mentioned, they're not always on board with doing that. So it's important for me to at least introduce them to the different ways and the different tools and different methods and, pedagogy and things that can happen with technology. And, I try and explain to them, we're looking at a bird's eye view of a bunch of different methodologies and tools. And I don't expect that you're going to walk out and use all of these. But if you find one that, works for you or speaks to you, that opens up the door for you to then bring it to your students and then, build off of it and scaffold.
Right. We spend a lot of time in the courses I teach talking about the activity rather than the application that you use. It's not about the tool. It's about what you're doing with it. I really enjoyed your blog post, and we will put a link to that blog post in the show notes. But I enjoyed your blog post on professional portfolios. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you were thinking when you decided to go that way, and a little bit about kind of summarize what it was.
Well, first, thanks. I appreciate the feedback on that. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of the post, when I'm working with graduate level students, if they're already established, they're already in a classroom, they come into my course and I say, okay, as educators, it's important that we have a digital presence that's positive and we're building our online brand. And one of the ways we're doing that is showcasing through digital portfolio. And almost always there's one in the crowd that immediately gives I'm not looking for a job, I don't need a professional portfolio. So the blog post was kind of a way for me to summarize that and to explain my thinking in an actual written forum so that, when we're having these discussions in class, for one thing, I can go back and point, to the blog and say, hey, go take a look at this, read this, and try and digest it. But, I try and explain to them it's so much more than just looking for a job. A professional portfolio is basically a shell of a place to look at your entire career. It can definitely help you become more reflective when you're looking at it and you think, ooh, I'm a little bit weak in terms of presenting, or gosh, I really haven't reached out and tried to get any grants. And it's a great way to kind of push yourself a little bit internally and reflect on what you're doing. And, the reality of it is these days, most districts are using the Danielson framework to evaluate teachers. And I always reiterate that a digital portfolio speaks to domain 4, which is professionalism. And it's a great forum for you to showcase what you're doing with students and to include artifacts. And, that's one of the tie-ins that I help to try and draw them into buying into a digital portfolio, because I do think it is important to showcase that. And not to mention, as I explained to them when we do a whole unit on digital tattoos, your online presence, if it's not there at all, let's say, for instance, at some point you are looking to seek a new job. Employers these days look online, to see what's happening. And I try and express to the students, both undergrads and graduate, are they going to find anything? And if they don't find anything, is their first thought either A, this teacher doesn't know anything about technology because they have absolutely no digital presence, or B, what are they trying to cover up? And so it's important. And, I have in the blog post, there's a link to it. I have a digital portfolio myself, and it's a living document. It's continually changing in terms of the look of it, in terms of the content of it. But I really enjoy having that one space to kind of culminate all of my work as an educator.
Right. And two things to add to that. Regardless of the model, whether it's Danielson or any other, almost every evaluation system is looking for products. And your digital portfolio is certainly an example of one of those products. But on a more basic level, depending on how you set it up, it makes completing your evaluation much, much simpler because you've got that record of what you've been doing. And as far as looking for a job, I know that, for instance, when I first joined the State Department of Education in Alabama, I was not looking for a job. I was approached about it. And when I made a recent transition to another position with the State Department, it wasn't something I was looking for. It was an opportunity that arose. And just as a real-time example, and I'll be vague here on purpose, I recently was part of an interview committee for a position that would be moving teachers out of the classroom into a more regional position. So it certainly would have been considered a promotion, an opportunity. And the process happened rather quickly, and we even had one of the candidates actually say to us, I haven't done a resume in 15 years. I wasn't exactly sure how to do it. And after the interview was over, with my immediate supervisor sitting in the room, I recalled that comment from that person and said, I've only been on the job a month, and I already have my resume updated for the next opportunity. And, of course, I looked over at my administrator, and she gave me a sly little smile. But everybody else in the room was like, yep, absolutely. That's what you need to be doing. So many times you're not looking for a job when an opportunity comes along. And if you're not prepared for it, you may miss out.
Absolutely. And, I try and also point out to them, it's like I said, I have a great digital presence and a great digital portfolio. And essentially, I've worked at 2 schools. I spent 21 years in my first school and then had an opportunity to move into a different situation in the same district. And so, I'm a great advocate of it's best practices to have something up to date, ready to go. And, from what you heard in the beginning, I'm pretty busy. I do a lot of things. So this is one place that I can kind of keep track of all of those things and the presentations and, all of that in one solid place so that when the time comes, if another opportunity for me to grow, does come along, I'm prepared, at least digitally.
Right. And again, many of those opportunities that come along aren't necessarily full-fledged job changes. Those are additional things, adjuncting at a local university, presenting at a conference, speaking at a conference, things like that. And many times that's how those opportunities come along. One of the things that I almost want to add to that is, yes, it needs to be digital, a digital portfolio. And I think it was Wix that you suggested in your blog post as one of the many places you could do that.
I use Wix for mine, but then also I'm very familiar with Weebly. And I find that especially for newer teachers that aren't comfortable with the technology, Weebly is a very easy interface for them to manage.
Right, and both of those are just examples of something else that I think is a requirement for teachers today too, and that is just your online presence in the form of a website, whether your digital portfolio is part of it, but there are other things that are parts of it too. As you expand that portfolio and you do some presenting, you want to have some easy ways for people to get a hold of you and see the other things that you've done and things of that sort.
And, Keith, while we're talking about it, I would also strongly advocate that on a digital portfolio, there is a space for personal information. I know some people waver on that, but I always come back to the example that I was on a board of directors recently, and we were in the midst of hiring an executive director. And I have to tell you, at the executive director level, everybody's great. Everybody has accomplishments. Everybody looks the same on paper because everyone obviously is at a point in their career that they can, fulfill that type of job. So when the final 3 or 4 candidates were blending together on paper, there was only one of them that had some personal interest information on hers. And in her particular case, she had mentioned that she participated in triathlons and some other things. And that stood out to me. Because, as an avid exerciser myself, I thought, wow, I know what type of discipline and training goes into a triathlon. And that helped her stand out to me a little bit more than the people that had nothing. It was something small that set her apart. So I try and advocate with my students and my teachers that are working on digital portfolios, have a personal page. It doesn't have to be incredibly personal, but in my particular case, I have a picture of my family because I am a mom and I am a wife. And then I've also created 2 interest portfolios, one for baseball. I'm an avid baseball fan. I've been to over half the stadiums. So I had so much content from all those games that I built an interest portfolio, and also another one on running, races, and so on. So again, I advocate for a little bit of the personal to come in because, even though we are professionals, we still do have personal lives, and sometimes I think a little bit of insight into that helps humanize us a little bit more.
Absolutely, because anybody looking for someone to fill a role on part of a team is going to look for that interpersonal aspect, and you can gain a lot of that from some of those personal things. So I think just the overall idea of a teacher having a website that includes a digital portfolio, and of course we're talking about something that's completely separate from your school-based contact information. But I think it's good, and I think it ties into our professional development topic this week very well, because one of the things that you're going to include in that are, the areas of expertise that you've gained from those professional development opportunities and things like that. So anything else to add about portfolios?
I don't think so. I think we've kind of covered everything. Also just that we advocate. And as you mentioned, I use Wix for mine, and I have the free version. I don't have the paid version. I don't have the pro version. So when you visit my site, it's going to say Wix.com or Weebly.com. And I advocate that for my teachers as well, because we're educators and, we're not making these huge bankrolls, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking advantage of a free service. So I do that almost intentionally, to show my teachers that I can build a site for free just like you can build a site for free. And one more thing I think I would add into that is you don't have to look at a digital portfolio as being this extensive monster that you have to tackle all at once. I also tell my students and teachers, you can start with one page. And then, maybe when you're more comfortable and you feel you have more to add, go on and add a second page and build. You don't have to sit down and have an entire site knocked out, and put in mounds and mounds of time to it. It should be a living document that evolves over time and continually changes.
Right. I mean, they're not necessarily our graduate students that have a deadline for that assignment. It's something that's going to grow with them. So, and I think the reason that is a part of so many graduate programs is to build that so that they'll keep it going after that.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Nicole, I really appreciate you joining us. It's been great. Where can people get in touch with you?
You can find me on Twitter at NMZampano, and you can also visit my blog. You mentioned you'll put the link in there, but it's zampanotechlab.blogspot.com. And thanks for having me. I'm happy to be a part of the conversation.
Great. And we will have all those links in the show notes, and we look forward to having you back again sometime.
Fantastic. Would love it.
Thanks, Nicole. That's great. I just realized I should have asked Nicole to give us a EdTech recommendation. I'll try to shoot her an email and see if she'll send us something for the show notes, but that was my fault. I should have thought about that. I think her blog post, and as you heard in the interview, I think that was very interesting because, that's something that, especially for coaches, I think is important to have that portfolio because it highlights your work. And, we want to make sure that we get credit for what we do, but we never know when an opportunity is going to come up. Mark, I think you and I both, our current positions were not really something that we knew about ahead of time. They just kind of came up, and we were there for them. So.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about how we can get more PD for coaching. What are our options?
Our personal PLNs, but once again, that's a personal PLN, and there's very little structure to it. I'd like to see more tracks at the conferences. Not enough of them have something for the coaches. Not just here's new technology or here's a new technological concept, but more about here's how we communicate this to teachers, here's how we get them using it in the classroom. I'd like to see there be more tracks for this, but I don't really know how to facilitate the making of these tracks. It takes a special sort of person to lead that sort of professional development.
Well, I also wonder how much of it is, in all honesty, a bit of vanity on coach's part, because when we're lining up presentations and proposals for especially tech-related conferences, let's be honest, we know the buzzwords too, and we can put the buzzwords in our titles because we want to see that conference room with 50, 60, 75 people sitting in it to make us feel successful. Would it be more beneficial long term if we had a much more specialized topic, and even if we only had a dozen people in the room, those dozen people benefited more greatly? Let's see, my English teachers come back on me. If they had a greater benefit from that smaller group improving their practice because of the teachers they're going to return to their schools and touch.
I think that, well, and let's not forget, I'm a guy who's offering a session this summer called Tech Tools for Depth of Knowledge Instruction. So yes, we do know the buzzwords, but I'd like to see there be topics such as inspiring your teachers to implement new technologies or strategies for deployment of X, or get your teachers off the workbook grind, or any of these sorts of things that are just tools, not just for ourselves, but for leading a crowd of teachers boldly into the future. Because I don't see that.
Is it an audience size problem? If you look at, I'll just use Alabama's technology conference that we're more familiar with, the Alabama Educational Technology Conference. Each year has about 2,500 attendees. It's a respected and really well attended, for a state level conference, really well attended event. How many of those participants are directly involved with instructional technology coaching? We don't know.
Most of them I see are teachers.
Yeah, most of them are teachers, and if you want to appeal to that audience, many of them are even teachers that would be labeled at the beginning or emerging stages of technology integration. They're looking for the basics, they're looking for the wows, and part of our job as coaches is to share that. I do know that the educational technology coaching kind of unofficial group that we've been working with in Alabama is planning a meetup type event. My understanding is it's going to be somewhat like a mini unconference that will take part during a portion of the event. And I'm very interested to see how that is attended, as far as, we've been getting the word out with our coaching friends, but how many of them will actually be there and won't be presenting and things like that. I know at the district level, that's often the problem. Even if a district does have multiple coaches in the district, when it comes PD time, when it comes, in-service day, they're the ones presenting. So they don't really get to participate in anything because they're the ones presenting in other sessions.
Well, I know. I'm not going to pretend like these sessions don't exist. And do you know Jenny Majera from Chicago?
Yes, absolutely.
She's a rock star. I've seen the sessions that she's done about making your school, the Google culture, part of your school. And once your teachers are using it in a network fashion among your teachers, then you can start pushing them to use it with their kids and get your kids creating and collaborating and doing all the things we want them to do. But notice I went right to the quote-unquote rock star educator that does these big high-profile sessions. We need to see more things at the grassroots level, more things from our districts that say, okay, you want to proselytize. Let's talk to you about how you do that and how you get people interested. And I hate to say this, but, part of being a tech coach is being a salesman. This is going to work for you. This is going to make teaching and learning more effective, and it's also going to do interesting things for your workload as far as streamlining it. You've got to throw it's almost like this is going to improve teaching and learning isn't the selling point. And so we've got to figure out how to be the salesman for this, and that takes instruction. Advertising people are not born, they're made. So we have to figure out how that we take our coaches and make them able to proselytize all these wonderful things we see can happen in the classroom, and that's going to take instruction. And I've gone totally off the rails with this. I forget what question actually started that spiel, but I want to see these sorts of things on the local level, on the state level. I want to see more about how you make ed tech an integral part of your school, and not just, okay, here's how you do an eMaze presentation.
Right. And I think
no offense to eMaze, I like eMaze.
and again, I think that's kind of where I'm going with the doing a session at a technology conference on integrating the coaching model to increase teacher integration is not a glamorous session.
You'll have 6 people, tops.
But are those 6 people the ones that are going to make a huge difference? I think that's where we need to think about it. And, I had talked about wanting to organize a Ed Camp.
Ed Camp Tech Coach, right?
Ed Camp Tech Coach. And, I was thinking Ed Camp Tech Coach Alabama, because I knew that it would not work as a regional effort, because in some parts of our state, and I'm sure this is similar across different parts of the country, if you were to take a third of our state and try to have a Ed Camp exclusively for tech coaches, you might have 25 people. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the idea of an Ed Camp with 100, 150 people, when it's focused like this, is not where we should be going. Maybe there's another option, though. There have been several successful, very specialized, national virtual conferences. Is this something that could be done virtually to get us organized in a sense of being able to reach the target audience we're trying to reach?
I like that idea of virtual, and I've been to virtual conferences before. I think about a decade ago I went to an education conference in Second Life, and we were all sitting around the table.
Second Life, what's that?
And it's World of Warcraft without all the fun. Anyway,
it was one of those buzzwords.
Yeah, it was for about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But it was a virtual conference, and it was neat and interesting. And I was geeking out more on the whole idea that it was a virtual conference, and I can't remember what that Ed conference was about at all. I don't remember what we talked about or anything like that. And I think the real connection comes from we get a lot of virtual PD right now. We get most all of us are on Twitter, and even if I'm not posting on Twitter, I'm always picking things out of my Twitter streams. But there's connections to be made face to face. Now, we can, if it was a more long thing, if we just had a virtual conference on a weekend or an afternoon or something, maybe it would be more ephemeral. But if it was an ongoing sort of weekly session where we interacted on message boards and had our meetups and chats at different points, maybe we can establish those ties and make it seem less the ether and seem like real instruction. I don't want to give the impression that I'm coming down on virtual conferences, because I like them, but I know they don't work for everybody.
Well, and I think I know where you're going, because, as I've mentioned before, and I still highly recommend this, the Coaching Digital Learning MOOC out of North Carolina State is an excellent program. And I think I mentioned last episode that I was, I'm using air quotes now, proud that I had finished it this time, because, like everyone else in EdTech, I think, I'm quite busy. I do some adjuncting. I'm working on the dissertation. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And there were times when even those few little activities that were part of the weekly experience and the one or two synchronous online events that we were encouraged to participate in, those created some scheduling problems. So, a weekly anything, I consider myself very active in Twitter chats, but there's none of them that I make every week just because of scheduling. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, not that weekly chats by any means are bad, because if you can make them, they're so beneficial, but it's great that you don't have to. That's different than the MOOC, where you're kind of working on deadlines. The EdTech Coaches book chat, the slow chat that's just wrapped up with Joe Williamson's book, that's the ISTE book, is great and has been great, and it's just wrapped up, and I'm quite proud that I probably made 85 to 90% of the responses on time. Now, I went back and tried to fill in the ones I'd missed and, just kind of address them a little bit later. But maybe there is a place for a once a year, maybe twice a year, all day long, multiple session virtual conference that has some of these topics that we can kind of set our calendars for and treat it like an in-person conference and make the effort to, clear our schedule for that day, and so that we can get some of that participation for ourselves.
I think it's going to take something like that. When I was in college and I dreamed about auditing 1,000 things, one of my advisors told me, "Oh yeah, don't audit it. You'll never finish it. You'll stop coming by midterm." Right. And a lot of these MOOCs and virtual sessions are the same sort of thing. Life gets in the way if you don't have hard and fast things attached to sessions, learning, things like that a lot of times. So.
Yeah, so that's
this coming from a guy working on his dissertation for the second and a half year. Life gets in the way sometimes.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting conversation. We would love to hear what you think about what type of PD works for you. If you're already doing something in your district or region or state, please share with us. You can do that through our website at my blog at bigtechcoach.com, and you can find the show notes pages there, and you can comment there. You can, of course, hit us up on Twitter, and I'm at Big Tech Coach, and Mark is
at J. Mark Coleman. That's Mark with a K, JMarkColeman.
And we'll have those, of course, in the show notes as we do every week. And we'll also have the information to touch base with Nicole. She gave her Twitter information, her contact information, but we'll have that in the show notes for us as well. Mark, how about some? Let's get the dinosaurs out. How about some EdTech Rex? You got something for us?
Yes, I got a couple of things for you. And actually, some of they might seem mundane, but I absolutely love them. The first is the Google Keep Chrome extension. Now, I said one time while I was on Alabama Ed Chat one night that digital notes are a lifestyle choice, and they are, and I have made that choice. If you might remember, the first video I ever did for the Alabama Learning Exchange podcast repository was on Evernote. This is 5-6 years ago now. Evernote was one of my favorite things in the world. Now I moved to Keep. They both have many similar features. They are notes, and I keep everything in it. That website I visit twice a year for my professional learning credits. I have that website and my logins in that. I've got the dimensions of the rooms in my house. I've got interesting things I've found on the net. I've got everything that I want to remember in my Google Keep. Recipes, passwords,
battery sizes.
Battery sizes. Every time I get a new piece of technology, I upload the PDF to one of these things.
There you go.
Of the manual. And I always have it so if I'm at the Home Depot and need to know what size line my string trimmer takes, there you go. But of course, you can use it in the classroom for all sorts of things, for just plain old taking notes. But the new extension is great, and I've linked to the Chrome extension for Google Keep. It allows you to include the URL and annotate it. So it's basically a way for you to annotate your bookmarks in a lot of ways. Also, the new Google Keep will let you set all sorts of reminders. I'm going to write a list of things we need to do and put a reminder for it to pop up next week when we actually need to do it. Or put a location reminder. Remind me when we get to this location for our conference to do X, Y, and Z. And when you actually show up, it pops up on your phone because it's tapped into the location reminder. I'm a big believer in digital notes, and this plug is for the Google Keep Chrome extension, and because of that, as an extension, it's a plug for Google Keep. But if you're into Evernote, if you're into OneNote from Microsoft, whatever you're using, the idea that we have these digital notes that we create online and follow everywhere with us on the phone, that's amazing. And it's an incredibly useful resource, and I find new ways to use it every single day.
And they've got a great app, I know, for iOS, and I'm sure they've got it for Android as well, and of course all that syncs up.
Yes, they do. They sync up, and I'm a big believer in using Google Keep. And I don't use the Google Keep that comes with my Google Apps for Education account through the school system. I put them all in my personal Keep account, and that way it all travels with me everywhere. If I change systems, change schools, I still have everything there. The other thing I wanted to mention is we spoke about it briefly last week. Not enough people know about Synergize because it has been a paid service. Google bought Synergize, at least the company that makes Synergize, and now it's free. It's a Chrome extension. I install it, and when I go to my Google Apps account, whether I'm Sites or Drive or any part of my Google Apps, there'll be the Synergize icon now on the page, not in the browser window, but actually on the page. And I can click it, and it's got the lessons that are there for that page. So say I'm on if I'm on the Drive page and I want to see how to share this document and restrict its visibility, give it a view for some people and edit for some people, it will have that lesson. When you click on the lesson, a audio instruction will start playing on how to do it. But when it comes time to actually click, it will say, now click File, and there will be a layover of your web page where everything is darkened except the place you want to click, and an animated cursor going up to the place you're supposed to click. So then you follow it, click it, and then it goes on to the next step. So it not only tells you how to do it, it walks you through every step of the way. And if you're pushing Google Apps to people who haven't used them anymore, it's incredibly beneficial. It used to be limited that if you installed the plugin, you had 5 lessons you could look at, which are all a minute and 15 seconds long. That's another thing about this. You can get in and get out. Tell me how to share this document. Tell me how to share this web, things like that. So you were limited to 5, so not a lot of people played with it. Now it's open and free, and you can use as many as you want. And I assume most of the people listening to this podcast are pretty familiar with the Google ecosystem, and if not, they are the type of people who can figure it out. But we all know those people that need their handheld.
Absolutely.
So it's something that might result in fewer emails to calls to you on how to do this. And it will also get teacher used to a little self-guided instruction on how to use these sorts of things, how to use their Google Apps using resources that they're able to follow themselves. So that's my other recommendation for today, is get your people to install the Synergize extension for Chrome, and that's going to be, links to both those are in the show notes also.
Great. Those are 2 great recommendations. I wanted to share, and as I've been sitting here pulling it up, I'm struggling to remember if I mentioned this last episode. I don't believe I did. I guess I could look at the show notes to find out. But I want to talk about Participate Learning. This is a website that has a couple of features. It is a app curation site where you can search for not just apps, but iOS apps, Android apps, websites, and even online videos. And you can search by topic, you can search by Common Core standards, topic, and you can also create your own collections. That's actually something I'm integrating into my graduate course for this summer, which is a new activity they're going to be doing. Instead of just creating a list of website recommendations, they're going to do a Participate Learning collection. But the tool that I want to mention that Participate has now is the Participate Chats feature. And we've talked several times about our professional learning network and using Twitter chats, and the Participate Learning chat tool is just amazing for keeping up with chats. You're waving at me, Mark.
Well, was this what you were presenting at, I think I saw you present this at EdCamp a few weeks ago, didn't I?
Absolutely. This is a wonderful little tool, and it has, if for no other reason, just simply going to chats.participate.com and looking at the still incomplete, but looking at the list of weekly chats or, regularly scheduled chats related to education that take place every week, and being able to go into those. But the Participate Chats tool has some great features. If somebody mentions a link, you don't have to worry about scrambling to write it down or try to right-click and save it or get it open in another tab, because it's automatically going to take all of the resources that have been posted in the chat that have the hashtag for that chat, and it's going to organize those in a collection. And at the end of the chat, with one click, you can save that collection to your Participate Learning account, which of course is free, and you'll have those resources. You can go back to them at any point. In fact, at the end of a chat, if it's been a really beneficial chat and there were several good things in there that you wanted to refer back to, again, with just a click or two, you can save the entire chat and download a chat file, and it will save all of the tweets that included the hashtag, and you can go back to those. Again, it's in your Participate account, so you can refer back to those. It saves them as a collection there in your Participate account, so that you can refer back to them. It saves them by date and chat title or topic.
Are you able to share these?
You are. There are some ways to share. My hesitation there is it's not like it's a one file share, but I do know that they are working on many additional features. In fact, the introduction of chat and the speed at which they're adding new features has been impressive. I know the guys behind Participate. I've actually done some curation work for them in the past, and they are really dedicated to making this tool really beneficial. So there are some ways to kind of get the word out and share that.
That's awesome.
So it's great. So check it out at actually www.participate.com/chats will get you to their calendar. In fact, as we record this, there are 5 different education-related Twitter chats going on right now. In fact, Mark, we should be ashamed because
we're missing Alabama Ed Chat as of 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, so that just started. So maybe that's our cue to wrap it up. Speaking of wrapping it up, we did get a couple of comments about the length of the show. If you have a preference there, let us know that as well. Mark and I are both known for being very concise and brief, and yeah, that's not really the case.
And not loving the sound of our own voices at all.
Well, I like to think it's the topic. When you and I get to
exactly
talking about this kind of stuff, it's something we're passionate about, and we enjoy talking about it. So if you have some ideas about that, some thoughts about that, please feel free to share those with us. And we know that we won't be able to please everyone, but we certainly want to hear your feedback and try to come up with a format that is most beneficial to you. Please take a few minutes to share the Today's Tech Coach podcast with someone else in your professional learning network if they don't already know about it. We would love to see our audience grow, and we are working on some additional guests. We have some plans for some. We've mentioned EdCamps a couple of times. We're actually going to do try to do a live broadcast from at least one EdCamp, probably at least 2, because I'm sure we'll try something at the one at which I'm part of the team. But we've also touched base with one of the other Alabama ed camps that we're going to try to participate in. So if you have any ideas like that, anyone you'd like to see on the show, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, please shoot us that information and let us do what we can to make this the most beneficial to you. Mark, anything else to close it up?
I think we have probably worn out our welcome for the evening.
All right. Guys, thanks for listening to today's Tech Coach. This is Keith George, the Big Tech Coach, and Mark Coleman. And we want to thank again Nicole Zampano for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next episode. See ya.
Thank you.